Families survived the Great Depression, using money tricks the banks would rather you never rediscover. In the 1930s, America fell headlong into the worst economic collapse in its entire history. The banks failed by the thousands, and the savings of ordinary people simply vanished overnight. At the very bottom, roughly 1 out of every 4 working Americans had no job at all, and there was no safety net waiting to catch them. And yet, somehow, ordinary families found a way to endure. They did it not with credit cards, not with government apps, and not with easy loans, but with a set of hard-won habits of thrift, ingenuity, and deep self-reliance that have been very nearly forgotten in our modern age of easy money and one-click spending. And with prices climbing and household budgets stretching thinner today, these old strategies are suddenly, surprisingly relevant once again. These are the Depression-era money habits that built real, lasting resilience. First, the absolute, unbreakable rule of the era. Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. This simple phrase was the unofficial motto of an entire generation, and it quietly governed every single purchase a family made. Before buying anything at all, a person asked themselves a series of honest questions. Do I truly need this? Can I repair the one I already have? Can I make something serve this purpose? And finally, can I simply go without it entirely? It was the precise and total opposite of the impulse spending that surrounds us today. And that discipline is exactly what kept countless households afloat when every single penny had to count. Second, the relentless repurposing of absolutely everything. In the Depression household, nothing was ever thrown away while it still held any possible use. Flour and animal feed came packaged in printed cotton sacks, and the companies that sold them knew perfectly well that women were sewing those sacks into dresses, shirts, aprons, and curtains, so they began printing them in attractive patterns on purpose. Worn-out clothing was cut down for the children, and what could no longer be worn became quilt squares or cleaning rags. Bacon grease was carefully saved in a tin can on the stove and used again and again for cooking. The entire household ran on the bedrock principle that almost anything could be given a useful second life. Third, the backyard garden and the practice of home canning. Families turned every available scrap of yard, and sometimes vacant lots as well, into productive vegetable gardens. And what they managed to grow in the abundance of summer, they carefully canned and preserved to feed themselves through the barren winter. A pantry shelf lined with home-canned food was, at the very same time, a grocery bill that had been eliminated and an insurance policy against genuine hunger. It gave a family a direct, reliable food supply of their own, one that no bank failure and no stock market crash could ever touch or take away. Fourth, keeping cash close and trusting it very carefully. After watching the banks collapse and lifetimes of savings simply disappear into thin air, a great many families became deeply, permanently cautious about money. They kept their emergency cash somewhere they could physically see and reach it. They paid for what they bought in cash whenever they possibly could, and they avoided debt as though it were a contagious disease. Living strictly within your means was not a clever slogan in those years. It was survival itself, and owing money to no one at all was a genuine point of pride and a real source of security. Fifth, bartering and the trade economy. When hard cash was painfully scarce, as it almost always was, people simply traded with one another directly. A man who knew how to fix engines would swap an afternoon of his labor for a basket of eggs from the family down the road. A skilled seamstress would trade her mending and sewing for fresh vegetables from a neighbor's garden. Skills and goods of every kind moved steadily through communities without a single dollar ever changing hands. And in this quiet way, everyone's needs got met through a dense, supportive web of mutual exchange and obligation. Sixth, the deep commitment to doing it yourself, always. Paying another person to do something that you could possibly learn to do for yourself was a luxury that very few families could afford in those years. And so people learned. They cut their family's hair at home around the kitchen chair. They mended their own shoes and patched their own clothes. They repaired their own tools, fixed their own leaking roofs, and built the simple things they needed with their own hands. Every single new skill that a person learned was money saved, not just once, but over and over again for the rest of their entire life. 7th, stretching food with cheap filling staples. The Depression-era kitchen was a genuine marvel of human ingenuity, a place where a very little was made to go a very long way. Beans, potatoes, cornmeal, rice, day-old bread, and these soups stretched thin with water, and whatever happened to be on hand fed large, hungry families on almost nothing at all. The cooks of that generation became absolute experts at the art of turning the very cheapest available ingredients into meals that genuinely filled the table and satisfied the stomach, night after night after night. 8th, running the household economy like a serious business. A great many families kept careful, honest track of every single cent that came into the home and every cent that went back out. Children were given real financial responsibilities and were expected to earn and to save from a young age. A household budget was never treated as a vague suggestion. It was the family's actual survival plan, taken with deadly seriousness, and everyone in the home, right down to the youngest child, understood clearly that the family's money was shared, precious and serious matter that concerned them all. 9th, buying quality once and then maintaining it forever. This one sounds almost backwards coming from a time of such deep poverty, but the most careful families learned a counterintuitive truth. A single well-made tool, or one good pair of work boots, if it was properly cared for, was actually far cheaper in the long run than buying a cheap version again and again as each one quickly fell apart. So they maintained what they owned with real diligence. They oiled it, they cleaned it, they sharpened it, they repaired it at the first sign of trouble, and they made it last for decades. The wasteful throwaway habit that defines our own time would have been utterly foreign and even shocking to them. 10th, the practice of pooling resources within families and communities. When times grew hardest, extended families very often moved in together under a single roof, sharing one kitchen, one set of bills, and the burden of caring for the very young and the very old. Neighbors looked out closely for one another, sharing any small surplus and quietly helping the family on the block that had fallen on the very hardest times. Survival in the Great Depression was very often a team effort, and the combined strength of the household and the surrounding community was the real and only safety net that most people had. Now, if you look closely at this entire list, you will notice that not one of these is a secret formula or a clever trick in the modern sense. They are habits. They are an entire mindset, built carefully around a few simple but powerful ideas. Spend less than you earn, waste absolutely nothing, make and mend things yourself, and lean on the people around you. Our great-grandparents practiced these habits not because they were fashionable or trendy, but because they had no other choice in the matter. And in doing so, they built a kind of deep personal resilience that most of us living today have simply never had to develop. The banks and the lenders of the world quietly profit whenever we spend freely and borrow easily. But the generation that lived through the Great Depression understood a much older and much quieter truth. That real, lasting security does not come from a line of credit. It comes from self-reliance, from a full pantry, a debt that is fully paid off, and a useful skill held in your own two hands. And that, more than ever, is wisdom genuinely worth rediscovering.